Ronald Previte is one of the most well-known mobsters from the Philadelphia crime family who went from being on the side of the law to being against it. He would eventually help rat out and bring down some of Philadelphia's worst mobsters and make a lot of money while at it. So stick with me as we delve into this thrilling American underworld saga in the life of the cop who infiltrated the mafia and ended up a made man. Childhood and military service. Ron Previte was born on the 9th of October 1943. He was born to the family of Mr. Jesse Previte, who was a Sicilian. He grew up in the Overbrook Park neighborhood in the west part of Philadelphia. Overbrook Park was a quaint neighborhood. It was mostly peaceful, and it was a nice place to raise a family. However, in his teenage years, his family decided to move from Philadelphia to Hamilton, a town in the state of New Jersey's Atlantic County. Hamilton is known as the blueberry capital of the world. As you can probably guess, this is because the town produces a huge amount of blueberries. In fact, of the 40 million to 50 million pounds the state of New Jersey produces annually, 80% comes from the Hamilton area, generating about $70 million in annual revenue. The Previte family didn't move to Hamilton for blueberries, though. You see, Hamilton is also known for having a really big community of Italians. Jesse Previte, as a Sicilian, moved there to raise his family in a similar community that he had growing up. It wasn't the same thing as living in Italy, but it was as close as he could get. Ron settled into the town quite well. He was enrolled at Hamilton High School, and he even played football for the school team. From the outside, Ron looked like just another regular teenager, but in reality, by this time, he had already started to get his early taste of crime. Ron started his criminal career very early. He had already started to show signs of delinquency even from middle school. When he was in 8th grade, his sister had said that he was in the school hallway often because he was constantly getting kicked out of his class for disciplinary reasons. He was just 14 years old the first time he stole a car. He wasn't stealing it to have a joyride or anything. No, Ron Previte stole the car to sell it. To him, it wasn't a big deal. He was just doing what he had to do to make money. That was all that mattered.
It was for thrills, it was for money. My life just wasn't what it was supposed to be, normal.
Making a hard, honest living was something that he never considered to do. A 9-to-5 was never in the cards for him. He didn't even consider it. All he wanted was to earn the easy way. Ron was quite intelligent too, and so it was easy for him to think up cunning ways to earn money by whatever means. Eventually, Ron graduated from high school and then joined the U.S. military almost immediately after. This was a personal decision that he chose to stick with. Ron's father, Jesse, owned a gas station and tried to get Ron into the business. He was hoping that his son would show interest, and he could eventually have a successor to run the business after he retired. Ron, however, had other plans. It's not really known just why he chose to join the military, but it didn't seem like a bad idea to anyone at the time. If anything, it seemed like Ron wanted to serve his country the best way he could. By this time, the Vietnam War was in full swing, and there were a lot of young men enlisting to join the war. He joined the Air Force. Now you'd probably think that with the values that the U.S. military instills, Ron would be reformed as a person. You'd think that perhaps this would be the change that he finally was going to make to go from a troubled young man to a hard-working, upstanding member of society. However, anything but this happened. He was caught selling government-issued jackets and glasses which he had stolen on the black market. The Air Force tried to see if Ron could be reformed. He was assigned to a psychiatrist. After an in-depth analysis, the psychiatrist soon discovered that Ron had a serious problem. Eventually, he was discharged from his duties, and he returned to Philadelphia. Time at the Philadelphia Police Department. Soon after returning from military service, Ron got a job working for the Philadelphia Police Department at the age of 25. As you can probably deduce, he wasn't exactly the ideal police officer. Ron did not care about stopping crime or making the city safer. To him, it was all about the money, and being a police officer gave him opportunities to make money illegally without raising suspicion. During his time in the police force, he did almost every corrupt thing he could. He mostly extorted people. He would force minor traffic violators to pay money to avoid getting arrested. He would steal drugs and money from drug dealers he caught on the streets. In return, he didn't have them arrested. To the drug dealers, there wasn't much of an option. Losing their money and products was a far better deal than going to prison. That wasn't all Ron Previte did either. He also extorted business owners, stripped impounded cars to be resold, stole from crime scenes, and solicited payoffs from bookies and mobsters. He also didn't mind receiving bribes and getting paid off to ignore the commission of crimes. He made a lot more on the side than he made working as an officer of the law. The interesting part about this all was that even with all he did, Ron saw most of what he did as just doing his job. To him, he was corrupt, but he also was a police officer who did bring down criminals. The way he describes it, he almost makes himself sound like the good guy. He'd even go on to claim that what he was doing was literally what a lot of other police officers in the Philadelphia Police Department were doing. In his words, "I had a good work record, except I was a crook, but most of the cops I worked with were crooks. I never learned about crime till I went in the police department. I always said that I really became an adept thief when I went in the Philadelphia Police Department. It was a nice life, and plus I had the badge. I couldn't get any trouble. He carried on with this practice for over a decade. Perhaps he was right, and the reason he was able to operate for so long was because the Philadelphia PD was in fact as corrupt as he described it. He was bold with how he operated, and he and his associates in the police force were regarded by many as menaces. Philadelphia at the time was filled with a lot of gangsters, and people expected that the police was the one thing that could make you feel at least a little more secure. However, with Ron Prevt on the streets, you were just as likely to get extorted by a police officer as you were to get extorted by a mobster. At the end of the day, the only people who really lost were the civilians. However, even this would come to an end. In the late 70s, the Philadelphia PD started to do an internal sweep of the department. The force knew that there was a ton of corruption going on, and it was intent on cleaning itself up. If the public regarded the department in a good light, it would help a lot with cooperation to bring down crime. When the department started to clean up house, Ron knew that he could not stay much longer. They'd find him out soon enough, and that could end really bad for him. Best case scenario, he'd be fired. Worst case scenario, he'd be prosecuted. Jail was not a good place for a police officer to end up, especially when you've personally put in a fair amount of people there. Ron knew that his best option was to simply leave, and so after 12 years on the force, Ron Prevt left the Philadelphia Police Department in 1979. Full transition to crime. After leaving the police force, Ron Prevt moved to working in the growing Atlantic City. At this time, Atlantic City was seeing a huge influx of people as casinos and other businesses sprung up as a result of gambling in Atlantic City being legalized. A ton of the people moving in were hoping to make it big. Ron started working as a security guard at Tropicana. However, just like when he was a cop, Ron just had to have side hustles. Illegitimate side hustles, of course. He ran poker games and prostitution, but even that wasn't enough for him. He went as far as stealing from guests' safe deposit boxes and furniture and bar supplies from the casino's own warehouse. He made a lot of money from this. He went ahead to claim that he had made millions. What was worse was that they couldn't prove that he was responsible for the thefts, and so he continued to collect paychecks from the casino while he robbed them blind. The amount he was taking was so much, soon he couldn't hide it anymore, and he started to gain the attention of multiple people. The first people to notice Ron was the Philadelphia mob family. He was operating in their territory, and they were fine with him continuing to operate so long as they got a cut. They didn't allow anyone to work in their territory freely without at least acknowledging or settling them. Those who refused to give the mafia their cut usually had bad things happen to them. Ron wasn't about to get into trouble with one of the biggest crime families in America, but he wasn't about to give up a chunk of his ill-gotten wealth either. So what he did was grossly underplay what he was earning so he could pay the mafia way less than they'd want to collect from him. By making it seem like he was a low-time criminal who didn't make a lot, and a fair amount of negotiation as well, he ended up agreeing to pay them $500 a week. In reality, he was making over 5 times that amount every single day. If they ever got to know about this, chances were that he'd have gotten into trouble with them. Fortunately, Ron knew how to keep his business private. After 5 years working at the Tropicana Casino, he finally left and started seeking a way to establish his own criminal enterprise. He started working with a few of his old associates from Hamilton. Together, they created a pretty lucrative enterprise, and they made a lot of money. Ron claimed that he didn't specialize in anything, but that he did anything and everything to make money. He was a smart man, and he never allowed himself get carried away. Being sloppy was the one thing that could bring him down. There were a lot of gangsters who were in jail for getting too cocky and exposing themselves. There's always the temptation to want to openly show just how powerful you are and how much money you're making. Not many gangsters have the discipline to remain discreet, and more often than not, they end up making mistakes that eventually lead to their fall. Ron Prevt also saw the crime family for what it really was. Unlike how the mafia is displayed in movies like The Godfather, the monster world is a dog-eat-dog world. There is a lot of violence and a ton more drama. Ron liked to think that the mafia had lost their way. They were completely different from how they were in the 50s when he was a child. He claimed that then they operated with more honor and class. Still, he was a part of the system at the time, and he had to adapt. Whenever he got into trouble, he used the connections he had to get out of it. While extorting people, he was often violent with them, threatening, beating, the whole works. However, he never went as far as murder. After all, dead people don't pay money. In an interview, he would go on to say, different people, different things. Threaten them, hit them with baseball bats, break their legs, break their arms, make them feel pain. Sometimes you have to do it because of somebody doesn't see it. Everybody thinks they can stiff you. He executed his work without empathy of any kind. It all seemed to work for him too. When asked if he considered himself a nice guy, he said, "In what context? Am I a nice guy? I told before that I was a crook. How could a crook be a nice guy? I didn't find it profitable to be a nice guy in my life." Soon though, something would happen that would change his life and his reputation for good. It would start his transformation from cunning criminal to rat. Being an informant for the New Jersey State Police in 1985, Ron Pre-VT was arrested by the New Jersey State Police. At first, it seemed like it was curtains for Ron and his syndicate, but the police came up with a proposal that he didn't see coming. You see, the state police was trying to bring down the city's worst criminals, people who made Ron look like a friendly neighbor. Ron knew the criminal world quite well since he had been a part of it for most of his life. The police told him that they needed him to spy and provide data on individuals that were part of their investigations. When he asked just what he'd get in return, they replied that in return for his cooperation, they would not charge him for the crimes they had arrested him for. Ratting on criminals is a very dangerous thing to do. Many of the people he was about to expose would kill him without a second thought if they knew just what he was doing. The thought of that alone was enough to make just about anyone feel a little worried and skeptical of working with the police. However, the New Jersey State Department had a tactic to help mitigate these fears. They told Ron that all they needed was information and that there was no need for him to testify against any of the people they brought down. They'd never know he was even involved in the process of arresting them. The way Ron saw it, there were two options: help the police and in return get them off his case regarding the bookmaking, extortion, and prostitution charges hanging over his head. They also offered to pay him. Money was Ron Pre-VT's language and the police knew it. As a matter of fact, paying informants is a very efficient way to get information from sources. The police has been using this method successfully for decades. However, when the police offered a payment of $350 a week to Ron, he clearly told them that that wasn't good enough. So the police offered to help him protect his bookmaking operation. Now this he could work with. He could continue to make money so long as he gave them the information they wanted. And it was just information anyway. He didn't have to be involved more than he wanted to. This was better than his other option, which was to go to jail. The choice was an easy one to make. He sang like a canary. He exposed everyone he could, from drug dealers to pimps to hitmen and everyone in between. The police were very glad about the wealth of information they were receiving. Without him, chances were low that they could get the data the old-fashioned way. However, even while cooperating with the police, Ron knew what details to talk about and what not to. He used this to his advantage. With the intelligence he provided, the police were able to bring down many criminals. He continued to work with the police till 1992. Working with the FBI in 1992, the New Jersey State Police recommended Ron to the FBI to gather information for them as well. The FBI was more concerned about getting information from the Philadelphia Mafia. They wanted him to get as close to them as possible. Prior to this, Ron was doing his own thing. Sure, he paid money to the Mafia to keep the peace. He wasn't exactly one of them. To do what the FBI wanted him to do, he'd have to not only be close to them, he would have to become a made man, a full member of the Mafia. It was a very risky deal. The Mafia does not take well to being spied on, especially by infiltrators. It usually ended in the death of whoever tried it. However, Ron Pre-VT seemed to have luck on his side. You see, Ron had somehow gotten the attention of the one person an infiltrator wanted to be close to, the head of the Philadelphia Mafia family, John the Greaseball Stanfa. Their relationship started when members of the Mafia loyal to Stanfa, headed by a man named Philip Coletti, met with Pre-VT asking that he start to pay royalties to them. Ron wasn't really interested in this deal, seeing as he already paid an agreed amount to the family. He refused Coletti's proposal. This started a bit of drama. Eventually, John Stanfa intervened. He personally invited Ron to Philadelphia to have a meeting and discuss what was wrong. He was trying to find a way to broker a kind of deal with him. You see, Stanfa had been observing Ron and was quite interested in his work. Meeting with him was a way of showing that he was serious about doing business with him. It would do Stanfa a lot of good if he somehow get a piece of the huge pie that Ron seemed to have. The meeting between the two men was productive, and Ron agreed to work for Stanfa. Over time, Stanfa started trusting Ron a lot more. Soon, Ron was a made man, which is by no means an easy thing to achieve in the Mafia. As a matter of fact, he would go as far as being the personal driver and bodyguard of Stanfa, which showed the level of trust that he had in him. This is where his betrayal came in. The FBI wanted Ron to help bring down Stanfa, and they offered even better terms than the New Jersey State Police. For one, they offered him way more money than the state police did. They also offered other benefits and perks, such as health insurance and mortgage payments. However, the FBI wanted him to wear a wire and testify against the men that he was about to bring down, including Stanfa. Ron found a way to avoid doing this for a very long time. Something would happen that would not only help bring Stanfa down, but would test Pre-VT. There was a serious mob war going on between factions of the Mafia. There was the faction loyal to John Stanfa, and a faction loyal to a man called Joey Merlino. Joey was a younger, high-up member of the Mafia who wanted what Stanfa had, control of the Mafia. He opined that Stanfa was old, and that he, Joey, had better ideas on how to run the family. If there was one thing Stanfa wasn't going to do, it was was giving up his position, and so he fought to maintain the status quo. It turned into a bloodbath. People expected that as Stanfa's personal bodyguard and close associate, Ron Previte would get involved in the violence, but he didn't. Ron knew that if he got involved in violence in any way, the protection the FBI provided would instantly be gone. He would be brought down, and he would be brought down hard. He had to stay out of the violence in order to keep his protection, which wasn't exactly the easiest thing to do as Stanfa was in a murderous rage. He managed to pull it off, however. In 1994, John Stanfa, along with 23 other mobsters, was arrested by federal agents. He was tried on multiple charges, and he was convicted and sentenced to prison for life. Stanfa's absence created a power vacuum in the mafia, and soon other people started to move in to fill that. One of the people interested in taking over after John Stanfa's incarceration was Ralph Natali, a long-standing member of the mafia who had been imprisoned but was released on parole just 6 months after the imprisonment of Stanfa. Upon release, he went back to his old life as a significant member of the mafia. He had to be careful, though. Because he was out on parole, he could not be seen with known criminals, or it would violate his parole conditions. He basically had to keep his distance. Another person who wanted to take control of the mafia was Stanfa's longtime rival, Joey Merlino. This was finally his opportunity to control the mafia like he had always wanted. The FBI was also interested in bringing down both Natali and Merlino. They knew that Ron Previte could provide them with incriminating information on both men, and so they turned to him again to help bring them down. This time, though, he could not avoid doing this without a wire. This was once again another bargaining chip that Ron used to get money. He agreed that he would do it if he would get $750,000 from the FBI as compensation. He was, after all, putting his life on the line for this. If things went south at any point in time, he was a dead man, and he wanted to be sure that if he was doing this, it was worth his time, literally. Ron first met Ralph Natali when a restaurant owner he worked with invited him over to dinner, telling him that the new leader of the mafia, who had the initials RN, wanted to meet with him. When Rob contacted the FBI about the meeting, he was a bit worried that he was being brought over to be possibly killed. The FBI was willing to risk it, however. They assured him that there was going to be a team of agents surrounding the venue, and if anything went wrong, they would be in an instant. Just to be safe, though, Ron got a few gunmen ready with instructions to storm the restaurant shooting if things looked like they were going bad. At the meeting, he met not Ralph Natali, but Stephen Mazzone, a known associate of Joey Merlino, and Ray Rubio, a meth dealer who was also a part of the mafia. Joey Merlino himself was absent. Joey wasn't exactly the easiest man to find, nor was he the most trusting of people either. Ron knew from the get-go that getting close to Merlino was going to be quite the task. He was a very smart man, and he took great care to remain discreet. He also didn't care much for Ron Previte from the start. He liked to be left alone, and he never really got personally involved in the operations. However, Ron found a way to get to him. It turns out that Joey Merlino had a big gambling problem. He was an addict, and he lost a lot of money in the process. At some point, he got involved with Previte's bookmaking operation, where he ended up owing $212,000. Ron knew that he and the FBI could exploit this weakness to get to him. Through the years, Ron continued to do right by the mafia. At least that's what it looked like. He seemed to be loyal, and he delivered well for them. This built trust between him and other members of the mafia, including Merlino. It was through this trust that he started to get a lot of information that the FBI would use in the future. He wore a wire in his groin, and through this, he recorded over 400 hours of conversation between members of the mob family, including many of the higher-ups in the organization. He even managed to get some dirt on the elusive Joey Merlino. In fact, at some point in time, Merlino invited Ron to a party he was hosting at his aunt's summer home. Ron showed up with the child he had with his girlfriend. Merlino was very warm with the child. He didn't seem to mind the fact that the 12-year-old child was autistic and did everything to make him comfortable. He even went as far as ordering everyone to leave the pool when the boy said that he wanted to clean the pool. Ron Previte would later go on to describe Merlino as a pretty nice man most of the time, even though he was a hardened criminal. All of Ron's work with the Philadelphia crime family would lead to a ton of arrests by the FBI. Over 4 dozen people were arrested, including Joey Merlino, who was arrested in Margate, New Jersey, Ray Rubio, Robert Luis, a drug dealer from Boston who had ties with the mafia, and other top members of the mafia involved in the drug trade were also apprehended. Ralph Natali was also arrested, but he chose to also become a government informant, just like Ron. He figured it was a better deal than going back to prison. Joey Merlino was found guilty on charges of racketeering and was sentenced to 24 years in prison. To be fair, he got a relative slap on the wrist compared to all his criminal activities over the years. But one person who evaded arrest, just like he did while he worked for John Stanfa, was Ronald Previte. At the end of it all, it seemed like he was a winner. He kept his illegal businesses, gained protection from the police, and even made a lot of money along the way. He played things smart, and even though he was another criminal as well, he managed to escape any real repercussions. After the convictions actions of the members of the Philadelphia Mafia family, the FBI offered Ron pre-VT witness protection. It reasoned that after all he had done against the Mafia, they would be out for him, and they'd come for blood. It wasn't an easy thing to be a government informant, a rat. Rats were not cared for or seen in good light. They were exterminated. The best option was to get informants to safety by relocating them and granting them new identities. That way it was hard for them to be tracked down in the event that any offended party wanted to exact revenge on them. However, Ron did something that shocked the FBI. He opted not to enter the witness security program. He said that he was not going to run away from his home. He acknowledged and owned all that he did. He did all he did on his own terms, and he claimed that if someone wanted him dead, it didn't make sense to want to hide from it. Sure, people called him the Fat Rat, and people reasoned that he was going to be killed by the mob soon enough, but that didn't deter him at all. He remained in Hamilton, New Jersey. Life after leaving the Philadelphia crime family. After leaving the family upon the arrest by the feds, Ron actually continued with his bookmaking business. Just like he predicted, the Mafia actually left him alone. He continued to live with his family, and he never really had a problem with even law enforcement after that. Ron went on to give interviews about his time in the criminal world and just what it was like ratting on some of the most dangerous people in the U.S. He never showed any fear, and he seemed to like talking about his experiences. Eventually, a book would be written about him by George Anastasia named The Last Gangster. As he advanced in age, he started to spend more time with his family and friends and became more and more unbothered about other worries. He believed that life was a beautiful thing you got to experience once, and people should enjoy it as much as they possibly could. Hearing him speak, it was almost unbelievable that the same man who said these things was also involved in almost every bad act in the book. On the 22nd of August, 2017, Ronald Pre-VT died from a heart attack. He was 73 years old. At his funeral, no one could really guess the kind of person Ron was. Family and friends were there to say their final goodbyes to a man they clearly loved and cared about. One of his cousins talked about how Ron loved his daughters, his grandsons, and other members of his family, even though he didn't really know how to express it. One of his sisters talked about how when she was a nervous and anxious first grader at Our Lady of Lourdes in Southwest Philadelphia, she always felt better when she looked out her classroom door and saw her big brother Ron standing in the hallway waving at her. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.